Okay, so I'm Fernando Cardenas. I started a little company called Appventure about a year ago. Wasn't sure what I was doing, but found something. So I've been a consultant for years, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I've seen sort of in the trenches, and hopefully it echoes your experience in the room. Let's talk about some real basic facts about the software industry. These are somewhat shameful, so I blame myself. Software failure rates are unchanged since the 80s. I mean, that's pretty terrible. Estimated failures cost about $60 billion a year. Average bugs, about 100 bugs per 1,000 lines of code. If you guess that a line of code equals a bug, it's about 10% bugs. 25% of software projects are just abandoned. They say, forget it. We're just going to spend our money somewhere else. And 80% are one of these three, or maybe all three. Over budget, late, don't meet the objectives they were intended for. So if you work in the industry, obviously you're aware of these things. You've worked on a lot of these projects. And for the gambling types among you, you know you can get better ROI in Las Vegas. So why does this happen? Well, there's a lot of reasons. I think one of the biggest ones is it's really hard to describe a software system. It's hard to specify a software system. And business people should be solving business problems. They shouldn't be talking to developers about database fields and all this crap. And really, developers should be solving technical problems. They really shouldn't be in there saying, well, what are your goals for this year? What are the goals of the application? They're not really trained to do that. So there seems to be a lot of disconnect in this world. And one of the applications earlier about the mashups sort of talked about something very similar. So our solution to this is, well, let's let business users create applications without developers, okay, in a very quick way. So the first thing you want to do essentially is our software will capture the business rules for your particular application. So there's a sort of a methodology behind all this, which I'm kind of glossing over, but for the purposes of this presentation, just know that there are ways to define rules in the system, there are ways to define constraints, relationships, things like that business people can understand. So the people at Amazon know, okay, a book fits in a category, a book's got a price that we're selling it at, sort of these types of things. The next step is once you sort of define the business rules with our application, you can then create a user interface that doesn't break any of these rules, where basically these rules are the backbone of the application that the business users specify. They can then, using different pieces of our software, iterate different user interfaces and say, oh yeah, this makes sense, this doesn't make sense. A lot of times you see in the industry, business users will develop, or they'll specify an application, they'll drop some documents off, the developers will build it, and they'll say, this is not exactly what we thought it would be, and actually this is wrong, and then you'll have to redesign, and it's kind of a pain. So ideally they'd iterate through this process till they get something they like, at which point they have a working prototype with actual good code that a developer can then sort of take to the next level. So what does this mean? This means really focusing on the things developers are trained to do, which is issues such as performance and scalability. Advantages of this system. So if we just look at sort of the three pieces here, the first is really you define a very strict business vocabulary that everyone sort of agrees on. And then developers can very quickly be talking in the same terms when and if there's a problem that they need to sort of understand. Also, we enforce adherence to these rules. I mean, today in software development, if the business user specifies a rule, well, I better test it in QA and make sure those bad developers didn't forget about it or didn't implement it the wrong way. So here, we can basically enforce those rules right in the application. On the UI side, when you're designing the UI, number one is does this application meet sort of the needs of the business? And who knows that better than the business users who actually can create these things, use them and say, oh yeah, this is exactly what I need, or no, this isn't exactly what I need, let me tweak it a little bit, or fiddle with some switches and get it sort of working. Also, it allows, the application allows people to create a lot of reusable interfaces and extensible interfaces. So you can create sort of custom widgets and add to this thing, so you're not tied into our crappy set of widgets, or you can create your own crappy set. Great. So also, obviously I talked about the redesign costs earlier. So what does the application really do? Well, it's going to generate 60 to 80% of the code depending on your complexity of your application, and just hand that right over to developers. It'll help generate test cases which can actually say, okay, these business rules are enforced, and we're going to double check if they're enforced. And it's completely customizable to really any technology or any platform stack you want to work on. So really, version 1.0, right now we've got it working. It's all very codey and very much for developers. It's almost really a prototype. And it right now can build all these things. So it creates web pages that you can, that'll enforce rules and save it to a database and bring it back out. And it's really kind of a proof of concept. What we're working on next is really the application, which is going to be the interactive UI with the business users. It's going to be something like Visio or any of these sort of workflow applications you might have seen in the past. And then also some more advanced UI elements, more things than just being able to save things to a database or list things or search for things, but really some more interactive elements. So that's pretty much it. So I would have loved to do a demo, but I thought it would be a lot to explain sort of the concept and do a demo and all this at sort of 5 minutes. So I'm out of time. Anyone have any questions, comments?
Dan Manager, where do we see a demo?
Talk to me afterwards, and we can set something up and go through a little bit. I think this type of tool, you see the power of it when you can just code up some stuff real quick, get some some rules, some concepts from someone who's going to use it, and then quickly assemble a UI, in a few minutes. So, yes.
Is it going to be purely web-based, or enterprise?
It's really enterprise. Anything that takes code. So, if you're using some tool that doesn't generate code, so if it uses some fancy stuff in the back where you can't see the actual code that gets generated for the UI, this tool really can't help you.
Okay.
So anything non-proprietary, probably. Yes.
What's the build? What are you using?
I'm using the Microsoft.NET 2.0 framework. Yeah.
Are the rules compiled or are they translated? And the second question is vocabulary contextual?
So if you, I'll start with the second question first. If you want to look at the world, it's a very simple thing, right? You have sets, you have relationships, so sets relate to other sets. Then you have constraints on those sets. So, I've got a pair of pants and it has to have 2 leg holes and, a waistband, and so maybe it has some belt loops, maybe it doesn't. You can have 1 or more belt loops or no belt loops, or so it's, in that sense, you define what are these sets, what are the relationships, what are the constraints, and then on top of that, we generate, then you define the user interface constraints, and then you kind of mash those things together. So, and I wasn't sure what the first question was.
Is the vocab contextual?
I'm not. What does that mean? I just don't understand.
From my experience in the enterprise,
yeah.
The vocabulary in most cases, the semantic meaning for another rules that you're trying to track down becomes different based on what you're targeting.
Right. So that's where you have to really define that vocabulary well up front. You can't really use vague things like, some people call categories. Is it really a category? Is it really a subcategory? What are you really doing? So we would help companies through that process to help them define their vocabulary. Yeah, I think so. Go ahead.
My name's Dan Moore, and in my work as a developer, that definition phase of the rules and the vocabulary is really what I get paid to do.
Right.
And the coding is secondary.
That's correct.
What makes you think that business users are suddenly going to be interested in doing that hard work themselves?
Because essentially we'll be able to cut. I'm not sure they'll be interested in doing it, but they're the ones who have all the answers. We sure as heck don't as developers, right? So we have to get that information from them anyway. So really, they have to do it anyway. It's just a matter of who, at the end of the day, holds that responsibility. So today, it's like, okay, business users, specify some stuff. Okay, now developers, it's your job. If you screw it up, shame on you. Now it's, okay, the onus is on us. We need to get you something defined in a way that works for you to understand. And we don't care how that translation happens. We just want to make sure that our things are well defined. We hand it off to you. you then take it and run with it. And at that point, the onus is on you guys. But initially, we can't say, oh, the UI's bad, or you didn't code the rules right, because we coded them and we own them. And we have a check then at the end which says, okay, did you break any of those rules when you guys were fixing stuff? So, is there a question over here?
Last question, sorry.
Yeah, can you sit on top of a search bus or a search tier? Talk back and generate code?
Sure. Right, I mean, you can, yeah, I mean, we have it right now generating a database. If you want to change that tier into a web service call, that's fine. You can totally do all that. It's totally customizable. And I mean, it just generates lots of code. So part of the process is, talking to the developers, figuring out what are their best practices, and implementing those in our system so that when the code is generated, it fits into each sort of organization's, theory on development. So thank you very much.
Thank you.